Good morning, folks. My name is Tracy Devereaux. I'm the Restorative Approach in Schools Coordinator. So this morning we're going to be doing a sort of a fishbowl circle with you. As you can see, there's 6 of us who will be the inner circle, and you as participants will be the outer circle. So because we're limited to an hour, we may not have a lot of time for questions. So if folks could, any questions that they may have as the participants are speaking, if they could put them into the chat along with their email, we will meet as a group afterwards and answer all the questions, and then send responses back to all the emails that are provided to us in the chat that anyone wants to hear a response to the questions. And also, I'll also put the question that the participants are going to be asked in the circle. I'll provide that in the chat in a couple of seconds here as well as share it on my screen once we go. We're not quite sure how the interface of this is going to work in terms of sharing or do, so I'm going to try that now, and hopefully it works for us. Are folks able to see this?
Perhaps we should include our email in the chat as well so that they can cut and paste it.
Yeah. Can folks see what's being shared on the screen?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
But it's too small to read.
That's too small to read.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure how to expand that. So basically, what's provided on the screen is is the restorative principles. So this morning we're going to be answering a question that sort of links our restorative principles along with the inclusion policy. So I'll quickly go through the restorative principles, and as we begin to look at the question, participants will sort of filter those principles, weave them into their dialogue around the inclusion policy in terms of looking at both inclusivity and safety. So as we look at the first principle, it's about being relationally focused. Having spent 14 years working for correctional services with medium to high risk young offenders, one of the things I learned pretty quickly is the establishment of relationships is hugely important. And those being just relationships. It's not about being a friendship, but it's about being a support and a trust. So many of our students that I worked with corrections had experienced a lot of trauma and racism and discrimination, and to trust a white man was sometimes a challenge, and it took a while to establish those relationships. But once they were, then a lot of support was able to come place. Being comprehensive, holistic, and integrative, sort of connecting the issues, context, bringing folks together, working and integrative, not siloed. So taking a human-centered approach in examining how we can support the whole child from the perspective of communities, government, education systems, all combined. That inclusivity and participatory, understanding that importance of first voice, allowing that to be heard, coming from a trauma-informed lens, being culturally aware and looking at a needs base. Being responsive, both contextual and flexible practices, and informed data. So working with best practices, being able to address those situations, focused on individual and collective responsibility, and understanding that as a whole system, being collaborative and non-adversarial, looking at the picture, and then ultimately being forward focused, and how we move forward to address those things. So I'm going to stop sharing this and hopefully, I think what I'll do is put the question in the chat. It's probably easiest to do that. I'm hoping.
We're learning the technology as we go here, folks, so this is real.
Yeah, this is and I think that might have come in not the way I would have liked in the chat. Is it? Can folks see it?
I see your email, Tracy.
Yep.
Oh no, that's Amy put that in.
Can you see the question?
Not yet.
Okay. I just paste it into the chat, but maybe it's
you have to hit the little arrow after you type it. There's a little arrow to the, did you push that?
It's there now.
There, it's there.
Okay, awesome. Apologies, folks. Talking is more my niche than this technology, and obviously the talking part's not going well so far this morning as well. So what we're gonna do is I'm going to start. Folks will introduce themselves and then respond and talk a little bit around the question. So we have administrators and educators and Schools Plus representation in our inner circle this morning. So the first person that's going to speak for us is Rebecca Smart.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Smart. I'm a principal of a small elementary school on the South Shore, and we have students from pre-primary to grade 6. Do you want me to speak or just introduce? Okay, sorry. Okay. So in looking at why I feel you should, or school community should look at using Restorative Lens, I really just thought, why are we using it? So we've been practicing restorative at our school since 2017. And for our school, it has really provided the actionable steps to fill in the how for many things that we're asked to do within our role. So we have a lot of demands and placements and things that we're asked to do within this job. And Restorative Lens complements trauma-informed practice. It complements culturally responsive teaching. It complements MTSS perfectly. And in fact, I would argue that if you're doing these things well in your school, you're actually already using some of the principles of restorative, whether you're framing them in that way or not. So as we're talking, I'm hoping there are things that connect and resonate with you as, oh yeah, those are things that happen. Having a framework through the principles that Tracy had listed earlier has given us tools to make our meetings more effective as staff, our meetings with parents more effective and relational, and also more focused. We've embraced a community approach that's based on mutual care, and I see that showing up in every aspect. In our food service worker saying, oh, I'm going to make sure that students are fed, and really being in tune with what the vibe is in the school and not overlooking. So it has increased the equity within our school for sure. Restorative is really strong and effective tier 1 practice, but it also has ladders up for tier 2 interventions and tier 3 interventions. And with the strong basis, it's able to connect those dots in a really organic way that is easy, it's relational, and it builds a stronger sense of community within your school. I thought I'd share a little bit about our school's journey. So I started as principal in 2016. I spent my first year listening and learning. And as that year progressed, I was hearing and reading more about restorative, and I went for training to learn more about it. It was something I brought as those September PD days to the staff, and we decided to give it a try. There wasn't immediate buy-in. But we did some training, we did a short session, and we started small. We started with classroom circles. It's not just circles, and we've certainly expanded. And we started with some questions for how we could be really consistent with how students debriefed any sort of conflict. So I was absolutely the principal that's like, I'm very excited about this, let's try it. So there was a little bit of which is just natural human nature of, I don't know about this. early on, I started getting positive comments from staff, but by far the comment that blew me away and really like grounded this practice as something we wanted to move forward with for myself and my staff happened in October. So we started this in September. At our October assembly with the whole school, which happens at the end of the month, I checked in with the students and I said, we're trying something new. How are things going? And I saw a hand go up to respond. And I kind of froze a little bit because this is a student that didn't even speak within the classroom, within the small classroom of her peers. And I could, you know, when something on that like that happens, you can kind of feel the ripple out in amongst the other students. So this student had experienced trauma, had gone through a period of selective mutism. And when she spoke in class, it was in whispers, if at all, which would often overwhelm and lead to tears. So for her to raise her hand in a gym full of fellow students and staff members was huge. And I called on her and she said, I really like what we're doing. I think we should keep it because it gives all of us a voice. So at the end of the day, we're hardwired for connection as human beings. If we're looking to create inclusivity, if we're looking at creating safety, I think the best gift we can give all members of our school community is the feeling that their voice matters and that their voice is going to be heard. This practice isn't something that I've really had to do a ton of work to maintain because it has become part of our school culture. So when we have a new staff come in, that a fellow staff share with them. It's something that we've never looked back. We keep it going. It has its own momentum now. It's part of our ongoing conversation in how we approach celebrations and how we approach every aspect of our school. So voice, belonging, and community, restorative is a great way to achieve it.
Thanks, Rebecca. Hi, everybody. My name is Amy. I'm a principal in the north end of Halifax, St. Joseph's A.M.K. School, and have been involved in implementing a restorative approach in schools, both in Halifax and throughout the province over the years in different ways. Great to be here this morning from Cape Breton on vacation. And happy to be here with my colleagues who've helped me in this work. And I think off the top, I just wanted to sort of add and build onto what Rebecca was saying, in that, you know, it does become that culture piece of collaboration. This isn't work that you can do alone, nor, you know, should it be. And so I want to touch on sort of one of the main relational principles for practice, which is being inclusive and comprehensive and holistic, actually, to really promote school cultures that are inclusive and safe for all students, making room for all students in schools and, you know, in a way that students all feel that they belong and contribute and have that positive attachment to school. It's very important. And so a restorative approach really helps us do that. And Rebecca, you used the word training a couple times, and I am frequently asked, you know, from educators in Nova Scotia, like, where's the training? How do I get the training? And I think that's important to mention is that the focus of our presentation here this morning, as Tracy listed, are the relational principles for practice. And so a big takeaway is that, you know, there is no one size fits all. And that's a really beautiful thing when we think about inclusion, because inclusion is about meeting the needs of students and meeting the needs of our school community members. And so taking a restorative approach is really engaging with community differently in a way that meets their needs. And this ends up promoting a relational culture and an inclusive culture in which students are safe. And as Tracy said, where just relations flourish. And so when we think about being comprehensive and holistic in the ways that we do everything, I know from both a teacher perspective and an administrator perspective, whether we are designing, you know, really super effective lesson plans, making a decision that's going to impact people's lives, working with parents, organizing some sort of community event, problem solving, resolving conflict, the ways in which we do all of those things on the day-to-day, if those are rooted in the principles, so being comprehensive and holistic is one, but being relational, being relationship focused, then that leads us on that road of transformation in schools, which then leads us to a place of being safe and inclusive. And so there is no one size fits all. And so as an administrator now, I always say to people, I lean on those principles. And if we are living those every day, then we are on the right track, and we are being restorative. So that is what being restorative is really reflecting constantly on those principles and thinking, you know, how was that relational? How could it be improved next time? And we're constantly doing this kind of action research in the day-to-day work that we do. And I think that's, you know, the opportunity we have as educators and the power we have as educators to improve, you know, school culture to one that is inclusive of everyone. One story that I wanted to tell, or one sort of main thing that's on my mind right now that I'm filtering constantly through the relational principles for practice, and most especially this one about how do we be more comprehensive and holistic in the ways that we work. So the work that we do, and also the ways that we work with each other in our school community. And my particular school is being relocated for the next 2 years. And so, you know, it's a school that's extremely important to the community. It's in my mind, it's a site of reconciliation in a community that has had lots of historic harm. Our school is a place where we've taken a restorative approach to promote an inclusive and safe environment for students, and we've also worked extremely hard at disrupting structures that have been harmful in the institution of education. And now, in addition to everything that's just happened with COVID and everything, our school is also being relocated for a period of 2 years. So you're imagining these students who feel very safe and attached to their school are now being relocated out of the community for 2 years while the school is being replaced. And so I'm constantly, you know, trying to think comprehensively and holistically around how do we do this in a way where students don't feel like an island in a completely different part of Halifax, which has a very different socioeconomic demographic, cultural makeup, and how do we do this in a way that helps them feel that sense of belonging that we want them to feel. And so, Tracy, I'm just going to let you know Leanne is trying to get back in. She just temporarily got knocked out back in. And so what I'm doing, so there's no one size fits all. No one's going to give me a binder that says, Amy, here's how you do this really well, right? Here's how you're going to make sure families feel connected, students feel connected, staff are flourishing, communities that partner with you, those kinds of things. But what I can do is root every single decision, plan of action, and conflict resolution piece, problem solving piece in being as comprehensive and holistic as possible. So how are we building a relationship from the beginning? How are we building community? How are we taking a relational approach to engaging community and doing that successfully so that all students are included and feel safe and connected? So that's something that I'm working through right now. That's kind of a new example. That's, I think, a good example of how we need to be restorative on the day-to-day. A lot of people think only conflict resolution. So restorative approach is both proactive and also responsive in that way. And so the only other thing I wanted to say in terms of the inclusion policy is that, you know, when we take a restorative approach in a responsive way, so when we take a restorative approach to solving problems, to resolving conflict in our school community, it's important to do that in a way that lends to inclusion. So I've been thinking a lot about this, that, you know, we are a system who has seen disproportionate suspensions for African Nova Scotian students who are Indigenous. We are a system that is talking a lot about disrupting those trends. We're doing a lot of work at the school level around Black Lives Matter, and the inclusion policy really, helps us do that. But when it comes, I think, to that responsive piece around taking a restorative approach, we need to take a relational lens to problem solving that leads us to a place of inclusion, even after we've been through those hard moments and those conflict resolution pieces. So what's the plan for the future? And that's where being future focused comes in, is it's not just about solving the problem, it's about transforming the culture so that it is more inclusive and safe going forward. I'll leave it there. Thanks, everybody. Really happy to be with you today, and I hope you're having a great conference. Thanks.
Hi, everybody. My name is Mamuna Brace, and I'm a principal out at a school in Eastern Passage, Ocean View. And we're a little unique, along with Horizon. We have grades pre-primary to 3. So we only go up to grade 3. So that produces a different feel as well. I've been using the restorative lens for a long time. And the way that I came into it was the first year that I was teaching, I had a beautiful class, but they were a very active class. And so I didn't have any classroom management skills. And I modeled myself after what I had seen in my own schooling, which was yelling, a lot of yelling. There was a lot of yelling happening those first few months. And that's not who I am. So at the time, there was a place, for some people may know, the Dartmouth Teacher Center. And it was a great place for resources and everything. And anyway, I went there, and the librarian had given me this book called Positive Discipline in the Classroom. And I read that book cover to cover, and it really opened my eyes to how to be responsive and how to be restorative. And that's how circles became part of my life. The role plays, the class meetings, those became a foundation for how I supported my students in my classroom. Just to sort of piggyback on what Amy was saying, using a restorative lens is being responsive. So it's recognizing what is needed in that moment and approaching it with really a lot of grace, humility, all of those pieces, even when we are in our own little amygdala hijack. So the relationship pieces, that's really important. So when we would have class meetings in my class, I had students come years later still say how much they valued that, how important it was to them that they felt heard. And again, this is a lens, and we talk about, I've had discussions people before, they all think that you're only being restorative if you use a circle. And as Amy had hinted before, that's not true. It's a tool. This is one of many tools that you can use. And so it's trying to clear up the notion that you're only being restorative if a circle is happening. Whereas really, you're being restorative if you are responding in a way that offers that grace, that compassion, and trying to take a step back and see what is needed here. So a good example would be when I was vice principal, we had a group of girls who just kept getting into it. And they were frenemies, right? Friends one minute, fighting the next. So they would just keep getting into it. And so what we started doing is check-ins every day after recess, after lunch. I mean, it was a lot of investment of time, but what it did was build that connection. This is what they needed. They needed to be able to role play. They needed to be able to talk it out. They needed to know that we were here to help them. And this is like grade 3, 4. The other step that we took further was to encourage them to do kind things for themselves, each other, other people. And we had a little calendar, and they put a sticker on every time, and not as a reward, but as just acknowledgement that, see, it's so easy to do so many kind things. And that really, really helped these girls be able to manage and move on. And eventually the check-ins became farther and fewer between, just because they weren't needed anymore as much. But we had built that relationship. And along when you're, another example of being responsive is if I have a kid who is in a complete amygdala hijack, let's say they're outside, and then I'm going out and I've built a relationship. They know I'm there, whether I'm teacher, whether I'm EPA, whether I'm admin, and I'm saying, okay, I just need you to come with me to this safe space. I'm not going to talk to you. I'll put the timer on for 5 minutes. You can use some fidgets. It will work if you've built that relationship. But coming out guns a-blazing, it's going to fail. So that's why the restorative lens is so important, because we're responding in that moment. When they're high, we keep calm and stay calm, so that, you know, you're bringing that feel. And I've done that many times. I've had kiddos go out there and, you know, let's say they're hitting or swearing like a sailor, but I ask them to come in, and it takes a bit, but they do. They know, we put a timer on, they have some fidgets, we don't talk. Maybe they need to draw, whatever. And that also ties into the misnomer that being restorative and being responsive is giving the kid what they want. But if a kid's in a full-on hijack and their limbic system is in the fight or flight, the only thing you can do is help them get that lid back on. That's what they need. It is not about punishment or humiliation. It's about responding to the child and then just meeting them where they are. So I'm sure we could all sit here and talk about so many different incidents and times where it's illustrated how powerful it is. But it's not just about being responsive to students, it's also about being responsive to staff and being responsive to your colleagues. And I also had a situation where a colleague was feeling disrespected by another colleague. And so both of them agreed to come and sit and talk. And it was one of the most powerful things, because when they knew it was a safe place, it's not about judgment, not about blame, let's just get it out and understand what the other person is feeling. Again, that's about being responsive. And which ties in, as Rebecca had said, MTSS, the inclusive education, all of these are tied in. They're not silos. So thank you very much. I hope everybody's having a good day so far. It's a beautiful day out.
I am still here. Hopefully you can hear me. I'm having,
We
okay,
can hear
good.
you.
So I'm Tara Moore, and hopefully my camera will come back and we'll see. I'm the Provincial Schools Plus coordinator and a social worker. And Schools Plus has been using restorative approaches to strengthen the links between school and community since Schools Plus started about 13 years ago. And we really feel that it's a valuable tool in building student and family engagement and trust. It connects, as the others have said, really well with the inclusion policy. The principles, many of them complement one another, such as the importance of student voice and choice, as well as parents' engagement, and the importance that everyone belongs, and honoring and respecting culture and linguistic identities. The importance of being safe and caring schools and making sure they're welcoming to all, including the families, and involving the community. And really working less in an individualistic way and more in a collective way to eliminate barriers and to improve well-being and address, to enhance, I guess, achievement and all of that. So I'm going to give a couple of examples of how over the few years where I see the connection with relational approaches and how we've been involved. And some of the examples are different continuums, I guess, of the tiers of intervention as well. So some are more of a universal approach because relational approaches can be used universally, and hopefully that's where the foundation is. But then there are times, as some of the others discussed, that maybe harm has been done and there needs to be a higher level intervention. So maybe more like a tier 3 intervention. The first one that I would talk about is that one of the Schools Plus facilitators had been working with 5 different youth individually and their families. And these youth were all friends and having some difficulties together in the community and also in the school. And the facilitator, you know, when she was meeting with the parents, many of the parents were blaming the other youth or blaming the other parents a lot for what was going on. And she had brought it to the Regional Advisory Committee. And community partners were also, it was, you know, quite a well-known in the community as well. And so everyone was, from parents to everyone, was trying to make a difference and help, but it wasn't really succeeding. And so then the idea of maybe approaching the families to see if they'd be willing to come together in a meeting, and that all the service providers would come as well. And a lot of people thought, wow, I don't think that's, you know, who's going to agree to do that? But they were quite surprised when all 5 families agreed. And then the community partners came as well. They were from health, the justice, and community services, and the rec department. And you know, there was probably around 20 or more people at this group, and it was overwhelming, certainly in the beginning. Can you still hear me? Sorry, Amy. Sorry, you can still. Okay, perfect. Sorry, I just noticed the chat. Everyone got to, all the parents and the agencies all got to share their story and their experience of what has been happening. And the parents talked about how empowering it was. And the service providers talked about how they had a much better understanding of what the parents and these families had been facing and all the challenges, you know, and later the parents ended up, not all of them became good friends, but certainly there was a lot more repair, and some did become supports for one another and continued to meet afterwards. And they really acknowledged how much they had in common versus in the past it was really about the differences. So that's one example that I'm wanted to talk about, and that's more of, you know, when you know, further up on the tiers. More around of a universal examples is that many of the programs that Schools Plus provides, or activities, they might be a cooking program, or it might be a paint night with students and families, or it might be a games night and things like that. These are universally available and free to everyone. And it's through a relational approach that we offer these. So sometimes on the surface, it might look like, why are you bothering to offer a games night or a drop-in time? Really, we've found that those are some of our most valuable interventions. So yes, someone might require mental health counseling and a higher level intervention, but they might not feel comfortable about going to that at this point. And so really voice and choice, and often through other things like a cooking night or getting to know you, we build trust and relationship. You can have the more difficult conversations, or maybe there isn't anything going on right now, but maybe in a couple months something happens and they need some support. They've now made a connection. So I guess it's really making sure that those connections are formed and that they know you in lots of different ways, right? So that when they get to know you, they're more likely to feel like they can reach out for when times are tougher. And one other example I would give is that, during COVID, relationships were still very, very important, if not more than ever. And so many of us, ended up having to go through virtual, this type of situation that we're on right now, became the way we were able to continue to connect. And they did offer some programs that way. And they also, for families as well, like they would run snack and chat. So back when we didn't have virtual, it would be you'd come by, and food is such an important piece, right, of building relationships and feeling community and having an environment that's easy and natural, right? We all come around food. So they started, some of them were doing parent groups with a bring your own coffee, and it was a very open group that, it's every Wednesday at 9 o'clock you can drop by and anyone can show up, right? And talk about and get to know one another. And they did similar things around a games drop-in for the youth. And the last example that I'll give, I haven't really talked about the early years, I've been talking more about youth, but all of this can apply in the early years as well, right? And so an example around checking in, one I think tool that is really helpful that could be used in a classroom but can also be used in other environments as well. We've used it in programs, that if we're running a program and it's at the beginning of the week, or maybe we haven't seen anyone for a week and they're coming back, at the very beginning we might do a check-in, which is, how did your weekend go? And it's very brief and everyone knows it is, but it's an opportunity for the adult later, or maybe one of the other participants might offer support to someone. So if they've said, I didn't have a great weekend, later on during break, someone might reach out and ask if, they want to talk about it later and things like that. And that's been done even in early years, where they might not have the vocabulary, but they have the printed off emojis or whatever, and so mad, sad, happy, and a few others. So keep it simple, but it would be on Monday, start the day off with point to, or say whatever how your weekend went, and it's a good cue for later the teacher or someone to, and some examples I've heard is that even in primary, a child would then say up to the child later and say, why are you sad? You're sad. So it really helps with the social emotional learning as well. Thanks. I think my camera's back, I hope.
It is.
Okay, hi everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Great. Okay, my name is Leanne Burke, and I am a vice principal and a grade 5 teacher for the Cape Breton Victoria Regional School Board. And as well, I help teachers in other schools implement restorative approach into their classrooms, and administrators implement into their schools. So especially in my board. So when I think of the question, why should school communities consider using Restorative Lens as an approach used to establish a culture of inclusivity and safety? I can't help but think of my experience with my grade 8 class a few years ago. So I'm currently teaching grade 5s, which is beautiful, but I taught junior high for about 15 years, and almost always grade 7, sometimes grade 9, but never grade 8s. And my colleagues, I would hear these horror stories of grade 8s. And I always used to think to myself, and I would see them in the hallways, you know, doing flips and making lots of noise. And I used to think sometimes as I passed by, thank goodness I don't teach grade 8. So then one year we had a teacher cut. And so I had started teaching my grade 7s. And then suddenly we lost a teacher. So everything got shuffled. And the kids who were used to their teacher got shuffled. They were in the same class though, but they just had a different teacher and that was me for science, grade 8 science suddenly. So I acquired this class it was pretty much October at this point. And so some things had been pretty much established in the class prior to me being their teacher. So it was a very difficult class. And it was, if some of you are aware of junior high, it was kind of, it was shuffled around so that it was what we considered the LD class, only because of scheduling. So there was, you know, a French language class because they were the ones that had French. There was a Mi'kmaq class because they would have Mi'kmaq. There was a band class and there was an LD class. So the students didn't really know that they were the LD class. However, because of scheduling, it just meant that his class would have LD support during English, regular English, which is all it meant. So I acquired these students, but somehow they knew that they were the LD class. So when they came to me in October, they said, everybody hates us. We're the worst class in the school. We are, you know, we already know we are. And so here I was teaching grade 8 for the first time. So I tried very hard to, you know, make things, introduce myself and do my restorative approach. So I started off like do things restoratively. So I started off, I said, you know, I always did circles with my grade 7s to start off to build that community in the classroom. So I said, you know, I explained what a circle looks like and what we're going to do and the rules. And so I tried to put them into a circle. So my first experience with that was pushing, shoving. Then they actually flipped over a desk, which was extremely loud. And then they got into an argument, and then someone threw a fully loaded with textbooks book bag across the circle I was trying to create and hit another student and knocked them out of their seat. So I was like, that's it. I am not doing circles with this class. That's it. Everybody back to their seats. And so I said, that's it. I can't do it. So as the weeks progressed, I did circles with the other classes and refused to do circles with this class. So they would come in and I felt really, you know, they were very disrespectful. They were really, really disrespectful to one another. So then I was getting tips, put them in rows, you know, they don't give them a lot of spare time, no group work. And so I started trying these things. I was desperate. So I started trying all these things. So they were in rows and, you know, and I wasn't doing group work and I was just, you know, lots of notes and just anything to try to get through. So when the bell would ring and this class was coming, I literally would have butterflies in my stomach because I just did not want to see them and they didn't want to see me. And I was being cursed at regularly. They started a fire in the back of the classroom in a desk and secretly had it going. It was quite funny because Miss Burke couldn't figure out where the smell of the smoke was coming from. So this was just before Christmas. So on Christmas break, I drove home. I cried. I pulled over. I said, I'm not going back. I hate that class. They hate me. I don't know what I'm going to do. Something needs to change. I'm not going back. And as I was sitting there on the side of the road crying, I realized that really importantly, that the one class that I refused to do circles with was actually the one class that needed it the most. And so once I realized that, I came with a new game plan in January. And so I started I was really determined, started off in circles. They recognized it right away. Hey, we did this before. This is the thing we did before. And I didn't give up this time. I kept putting them in circles. And it was really by the second day they came in. The first circle was not great. It was messy. However, they got the gist of it. And the next day when they came, they immediately, the minute they saw me, they asked, are we going to do that circle thing again today? And so I spent some time and often educators will ask this question. They will say, especially like grade 8 science, math, and even in high school, we don't have time for this. We have too many curriculum outcomes we don't have time to put them in circle. And it always makes me think of this grade 8 class because I spent so much time putting out fires, literally, and trying to get everybody to get along, and speaking to kids in the hallway and sending them to the office when I had to. There was barely any real genuine learning happening in that classroom. And so once I started to do the circles, they started to help me right away. They would say to another student, Brody, don't be rude to miss, or it's not your turn to talk. And so it was no longer just me that was trying to discipline that classroom. They were all helping everyone kind of stay in line and follow the rules. And it wasn't just during circle time, of course, but I spent some time really front loading these circles. And so they loved it. They thought they were tricking me. Can we do another circle? Can we do another circle? They thought I didn't notice that we weren't learning a lot of science, but really I was tricking them. And so once I got those relationships established, and really they had to not just make relationships, they had to remake them and repair them. I had girls that still didn't speak in a circle for 3 months, even when we did them every day, because they didn't feel safe in that environment. But eventually they did. And the difference in that classroom was unbelievable. They're one of my favorite classes ever. They graduated 3 years ago. And if I see them somewhere like at a hockey arena or something, I hear this really big, loud, Miss Burke from across the arena. And it's one of those students. And they would leave my classroom and I could see it, and it was painful. I could see them leave my classroom at the end of my class, go across the hall, and within minutes, they would be sent to the office, some of them. And so teachers were saying, what are you doing over there? Almost suspiciously, like I was doing something magical over in my classroom. And so I would tell them I'm just trying to build relationships with them. And they have a lot of baggage, some of them. And some of these kids, it was the first time that, maybe the first time this year or the first time in a long time that anyone ever took the time. I started off saying, where's your homework? Why isn't your homework done? And instead I was starting off saying, how was your weekend? Tell us about your weekend. And then I would have kids telling me, literally, I can remember a student saying, my mom and dad split up this weekend. They got in a huge fight on Saturday. The police were called, and now my dad moved out. And had I been checking for homework like I had been doing first thing that morning, I would have given that student, which I had done in the past, a little bit of a hard time about not having that homework done. But when you take the time to, kind of carve out a space and a place in your classroom that you can let them know that they're safe and they're cared about and give them a voice, then you get back tenfold the amount of time that you give to that. And so it was a pretty valuable lesson for me. And so when I have educators say to me, I don't have time, I too tell them, you really do. If you put this in the beginning, you'll get back so much time and so much learning in your classroom. It's well worth it. So thank you.
Thank you, Leanne.
Tracy, can I just add something that's
No,
sparked
sorry.
by all of these? It'll be quick. On the well-being front, I find the repair piece, and a few of you have talked about it, is just so invaluable. Often in traditional settings, when you hear both sides, if there's a conflict, and then you kind of give judgment, but they don't have that chance of connection, or even worse, you get the you did something wrong, say that you're sorry, the forced apology. There really isn't a chance of repair or safety. One, if you're on the receiving end of a forced apology, it doesn't feel genuine, so it does nothing to increase your sense of safety. And two, if you're being forced to do the apology, you're possibly resentful. So what I love about restorative is the final question of what do we need to do to make things right? And when we put that power into the student's hands, it allows the person who was harmed to ask for what they need, and it allows the other person to really assess, am I in a point of readiness? So sometimes students aren't ready to apologize right away, but they can reflect upon it and be ready later. And by not being so quick to just get it done and get it wrapped up, and allowing that cool down time in the apology and the repair piece to come after, it does a lot on both sides for the well-being piece. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. I I sort of introduce myself in lots of settings as the collector and conveyor of stories. Stories are really important. And getting to know our students' story is one of the greatest gifts we could ever give ourselves. Lots of times when we take the time to learn the story, the dividends that come back over the course of the year, Leanne alluded to it, sometimes, teachers will talk about, well, I don't have time. I have to get through this curriculum. I don't have time to do those circles. I don't have time to do those things. Over the course of my career, I've understood completely that if you invest the time in September to listen to the stories, you will have more than ample time to get through the curriculum. Because not knowing the stories is sometimes leaves you with dealing with situations of the unknown, kind of what Leanne alluded to, and others as well, but particularly the situation with the parents splitting up and not knowing that, and getting to know our students and having those relationships. Just prior to coming into this position, I was teaching NSCC courses at the Central Nova Scotia Correctional Facility in Burnside. And every morning would start with a circle. And the best classes we would have on those days were the mornings that Trudy cried. And Trudy was the teacher at Burnside for 29 years. She taught there for 29 years. And on the days that she would cry, because I would have circle questions for them, and ultimately I would force Trudy to bring herself to a place that would be pretty emotional for her. She was older, her parents had passed away, and so lots of times she'd reflect back on that and it would bring tears. And it was amazing the empathy that these individuals in custody, you've got these people who get looked on through a certain lens that is sometimes pretty unfair. But in those days when that would happen with Trudy, those classes, they were bang on those days. There was an establishment of a set of community values that made that effective, and we all do it. You listen to everyone speak this morning. When we think about those principles and coming from that lens in there, it's not about, no one talked about going to their bookcase and pulling out a binder. No one talked about flipping through a manual. No one talked about that. Every single person there talked about those principles in a way that of mostly establishing those relationships, and then with the establishment of those relationships, allowed for a lens of those other principles to permeate every decision and every conversation that happens within that classroom. That leads to the ultimate fairness that all students acknowledge. When you do a survey of students, whether young or into their adult years, around, who was your favorite teacher, they'll always remember who that teacher was. And when you asked why, generally there's only two answers. The first answer would be they were fair. They were fair to everyone. The other answer is usually around the subject. They were really passionate about what they did, so they brought a level of excitement around the learning. But that fairness and comes from those just relationships. When we establish those just relationships, it still allows for all the rules that exist to come into play. It still allows the educator to address bad behavior. It's just how it's received. It's not received as adversarial. It's not received as personal. It's how it is. That's the lens we're looking for. We're being restorative here. This is not I'm challenging you because I don't like you. I'm challenging you because the behaviors you're displaying right now don't go with the community values that exist in this room for everyone. And lots of times when we set up our dynamics in those ways, it will not be the teacher at the front of the room that does the policing. Students will police each other. They will call out the bad behavior of others in the circle, kind of like what Leanne talked about when she talked about her circle. Sometimes it's someone else going, Brody, you can't speak right now. It's not the educator, because that level of respect is there. Establishing those, creating those, in many times, sometimes you as the educator become that relationship for that young person that is the only just relationship that they have. I can remember with the Halifax Youth Attendance Center, us having to do a presentation to the deputy ministers. And at the end of it, I asked, being who I am, I'm a storyteller. That's what I do. I said, can I tell you guys a little story? You should always ask permission as educators. It's great that we share stories with our students, but we always should ask permission for them. And then when they acknowledge and give you that permission to tell the story, then it tends to be a lot more effective. So when I said yes, I said, as a boy growing up in Glace Bay, I said I had ample opportunity to get in trouble. And it wasn't fear that stopped me, believe me. The thing that stopped me from getting in trouble as a young person was the thought of the look of disappointment on my mother's face coming to a police station. I said, the young people I work with every day have no one to disappoint. My role is to become that person that they don't want to disappoint. Because ultimately, when they're facing those situations, and lots of times it's our most marginalized students that end up, being in a situation where their greatest challenges come. If they can pause for a second and go, what would Miss Brace think? What would Miss Hunt think? What would Miss Smart think? What would Miss Burke think? What would Miss Moore think? What would they think? That pause, if we can create that, that's huge. That's huge. They don't want to disappoint. They're relational. We thrive for those relationships as human beings, and we establish them. And that's not to say there's lots of students that I worked with over the years that their behaviors made me almost physically ill. Like they would have done things that hugely go against my moral fibers. But that's not to say that I didn't have a job. And if you were to poll them, they would say, Tracy thinks I'm great. Because that's my role. They have to think that. We want all our students to think that, right? When they think that you think they're great, they'll be great. When we display a behavior to them that makes them feel like they're not great, it'll be a self-fulfilled prophecy. They will not be great. One of the things I've been talking about since coming into this role, especially in the work that I've done with Tara over the years and some others, and especially in terms of children in care, we really have to get to a place where if we can look through put into our lens the concept that every child in Nova Scotia is Nova Scotia's child, we start to look through a lens where we're able to support. So believe it or not, this hour went by super quickly. I don't know. Hopefully, for the audience, I think as the inner circle, I think folks agree that it went by very quick. Please, if there's any questions, put them into the chat. If you want to put your email address into the chat to connect, we have a team of folks who are working really hard at establishing a restorative approach around the province, and we're beginning to do some really exciting work. If you want to be part of that, we're more than welcome to have you there. If you want to come join us to help grow this, to build it around the province. We learn on a daily basis. I mean, some of these people around here, I won't say any names, but like Amy, who's been around for 1 million years at it, we still learn every day. There's things Amy learns every day. That's the reason why it's not a binder. You can memorize a binder, but that's not to say that you're being restored, because if we think about that last list of being forward focused, it means it's organic, it's growing, it's changing, it's evolving all the time. So you can't look back and say, well, you know what, I took a course in a restorative approach in 2010. I know it. I've got that. It's not the same course today. It's things have evolved, things have changed. So we're excited about having folks come with us on the journey. Please, if it's something that you're interested in, let us know in the chat and reach out. I noticed a couple of names there that I've done some work with already over the course since I've been coming in here, which is nice to see you here. And thank you again for the collaboration folks for coming on board and sharing their stories and that lens and feeding it. So hopefully we can move forward and see this grow. And we look forward to hearing from everyone. So thanks so much. And I think
Thanks
we did.
everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.